Reading, so I wanted to do a short vid on Pluto Moon Aspects, and it was going through Francis Bacon's. He's a famous painter from the UK. I think 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s he got famous, and then 80s. And this is a period. This is the 80s, his 80s period. His earlier pics were very distorted and very um, horrific. Images of faces turning and shifting in different directions. I think the inspiration for actually the Jacob's Ladder scene, the Jacob's Ladder film with Tim Robbins, and there's this scene where, well, throughout the whole film, he's having these flashbacks, and some of them are just distorted images. I think they were very inspired by Bacon's work. This is a painting that's a little more serene. The self-portrait is, a sitting figure, and what I really enjoy about this particular painting is the very, very vague indications of depth and space. They're still there. You could see it, but there's distortions and there's a loss of indication of time and space in certain places and spaces of this painting, which to me implies the loss of self, distortion of the self. There's no clear outline between the figure's self perception and identity. There's no such thing as a head that merges with a background, window or painting or world, whatever that is, gateway. But you see in the painting that you see a head and the background of the head is merging into the head of the figure or overtaking it, or he's merging into it and away from the foregrounded reality in the painting. Just so like a spiral shape that takes you in to the painting and pulls you out. Um, I thought this was great for what I'm going to talk about because this is some of the most difficult astrological aspects to look at and summarize. And I don't do this with ease. I don't take it lightly. This is very deep for people. This is very painful for humans, including myself. Um, Pluto aspects alone, just looking at that is, I mean, you're looking at the core of beingness of a human and the horror of what it is to lose boundaries in family and the consequences of that for the rest of the life, for the social world. And what I mean by that is, I'm just trying to find that quote because I lost it apparently. And what I mean by that is that the relationship, and we all heard this before, this is very cliche. The relationship we have with our parents is the template for all the experiences we have with everyone else in our life. And so whatever particular types of communication we learn or behaviors we learn, we take those on as how we communicate to the rest of the world. And so it's especially horrific when you're taught to communicate in such a way that undermines yourself or that negates yourself. And I'm talking about when a child is parentified, when a child loses the boundaries of itself because it's not allowed to have a self. And so the self is hammered away or kind of hammered in so as like a replacement self could come about so as to please the parent. And so it usually the implication here is that it is the parent that takes on, usually in these circumstances, the plutonic role. And it could be in the sense of, it could be interaspects between the parents and child, or the parent and child. It could be the child itself that has a Pluto conjunct moon, a Pluto opposed moon, a Pluto sextile moon, a Pluto trine moon. It could be an aspect in the chart and an interaspect. Usually what we see with Pluto Moon aspects is, to put it very plainly and clearly and mythopoetically, is the child is taken on a trip to the underworld through the parent that that planet symbolizes. And in the case of Pluto Moon, it's Moon symbolizing the mother, Pluto symbolizing the underworld. It's usually the mother, but it doesn't have to be. It could be whatever the dominant parent is. It could be the father as well. Although we would see the father more with an aspect like the sun, maybe Sun Pluto. Um, but in terms of the moon, we're talking about the self, and the experience of the mother and the child is something that is untouchable by the father, because of the intimacy of that, of the child coming from the body of the mother. What Pluto Moon implicates in the archetype of the devouring mother is the child comes out of the mother, but the child really never comes out of the mother. Or the child comes out of the mother and is reabsorbed back into the mother and is consumed. There's that painting of Goya drew of Saturn eating his young, and there's no mythical paintings of the mother eating young, but there are some stories. I didn't have time to really get into it or search, see if I can find or remember. And there may not be. I'm not remembering fully. And so what I'm talking about here is, mainly for this video, is I'm talking about enmeshment, the Devouring Mother archetype, Pluto Moon in the charts of men. And it could equally be for women too, though, because women can have a Pluto Moon aspect. And then when I see such in the chart, I might ask, did the mother allow you to be? Did the mother allow you to have your own identity? Did she foster growth of your identity? Usually I get the no. So the self grows in reverse. It's kind of like the clip off in the Kabbalah, the tree of death, where the tree, instead of growing in the sunlight into instead of that, you have the child growing in reverse, growing backwards, growing towards the underworld, towards hell, like a reverse tree, and being fed instead by dark rays of influence, if that makes sense. Usually we're used to the analogy of a plant or a tree growing and reaches its branches to the sky under the sun's light and growth, and neutrinos which foster its growth. But here we see, when Pluto is an aspect to the moon, we see, when Pluto is an aspect to any planet, we see the reverse. And because it's the moon, which symbolizes birth in the womb, we have an inversion where the child grows upside down, and it's an upside down world. So all the nurturing, all the nurturing that a child may usually get is not given, but it's in reverse, and the child is put back into the body of the mother. I have a quote here. Maybe it's a good time for it. This is a quote by Michael Gurian, who writes books on male enmeshment. When a mother abuses her child, she is devouring his soul, his core self. One of his great journeys in life is to retrieve his soul from the depths of the goddess's belly. And this is a quote by Michael Green, who uses a lot of mythology in his books to describe the myth mythological experience of enmeshment and of Pluto and the moon with solutions. And what we're looking at with Moon Pluto, and I know this quote sounded very extreme, but that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the self, the child being parentified. We're looking at a child that's not allowed to be. The soul is not allowed to express itself. So it's stifled and suffocated within. And instead, what is created is a series of altered personalities that please the parent, that please the mother or the father, or whatever the role is. And you have a switch of identities where the child becomes the parent and the parent becomes the child. And this type of inversion causes the child to become something than they really are. And they never experience the nurturing or the protection. And this is at the cost of their own spiritual, their own growth, their own personal soul growth. And so then what happens later on in life is the child becomes hypervigilant over because it involves the moon and safety and the home, and the true home, of course, being the heart, the deepest heart of one's being. And that's the real meaning of the moon. Whereas Pluto, the meaning of Pluto is um, authenticity, and anything that's not authentic being destroyed. And and so it's a rebirth. Pluto always represents a transformation, a rebirth of the self. So in essence, it represents death. And so in this case, a child can grow up becoming what we like to call these days, the whole dance of the empath and the narcissist, or narcissist and echo mythologically. And so the child becomes hypervigilant and absorber, extremely psychic, because it learns to read, right? It learns to read the predator, which is the parent. And and that's what it is. It has to read for its own safety, for its own survival. It has to be able to read the parent. And so Pluto also encompasses, black magic, um, magic, used in a negative way because it's not a healthy sense of psychic power that's gained necessarily. This is a form of incest, and it causes the child to be incested with energies. Whether there's direct abuse or not doesn't matter because the child grows up as if there was sexual abuse. And so this causes Stockholm syndrome in the child. This causes all sorts of rewrites in the maze of the mind and in the maze of growth. And usually what you get is you get a person who's unable to, and no one gets escape projection. All human beings project. There's only so much accountability a human can handle, even those who work at it. And so projection is a safe way to disengage from a part of oneself that one has shame for, or one has identified with their own identity, and which is overwhelmingly judgmental or destructive to one's stable sense of identity. So then projection is necessary, to the degree that it needs to be until it can be recognized as such. And so one of the main problems of this type of abuse in adulthood is mirroring. I don't know the exact psychological term. It might be mirroring, I'm not sure. And mirroring is when your you as a person having, major Pluto aspects to your, could be your Venus as well, any of the personal planets, really. Venus, Mercury, Mars, Moon, Sun, but this is especially prevalent with the moon because the moon rules moods, it rules, safety of the self, of the body, of the being. And so what you can experience is that when you're in an environment where anyone takes on similar characteristics of the parent that have maybe had frightened you or that express disapproval, then there could be an immediate identification with that and a sort of mirroring where it's assumed, the person assumes that someone else is having an emotional experience. Maybe they're moody, maybe they're upset, and that somehow the person is responsible for their emotion, the other person's emotions or the other person's moodiness or circumstances in that moment. And so there could be a projection that they're being attacked when that person may be upset for some other reason. But because they're in the vicinity and they're close to this person who's had this type of abuse, the person will interpret it as directed towards them. And that's a type of over hypervigilance. And so that's why I chose this particular painting, as you see the distorted image of the self is trying to merge with nothingness, with beinglessness. That image behind is hazy, it's bluish, pastel. And these paintings are actually more alarming than the early ones because these are like bright pastels, and that's kind of disturbing because, and then with the black sweatshirt, you have the void of self. You have a void in the middle of the painting, you have a hole. And the character, the image, the figure in the portrait is embodying a hole. Nothing there is there in the center of this being. The merging of the face with the background speaks to a distortion, a lack of boundary between self and an overwhelming world. You could see that window as a window to the world outside. The figure is static in a room, contained and quote unquote perceptively safe. But that background square could be a window to the outer world and the horror of losing oneself. And enmeshment, causes a loss of self. So now I'm going to move on to the solution or the direction. And so the direction towards healing is to recover the soul, recover the lost self, because it could never have been exterminated fully. Oh, well, I mean, in some cases it can be that way if the child never leaves home, if the child never leaves the fantasy world, evidence of bewitchment. And there are those cases where enmeshment is so bad that the child is completely lost in fantasy, or the child is never leaves home and never leaves that role of being a child. However, in the case that one is seeking healing, one is seeking the journey of recovering the soul, recovering the core self from the depths of the womb, of the belly, of where this child was birthed from. And so it is a journey to the underworld. It is a journey to hell to recover the soul. And healing lies in the full externalization of the self to the world, of the self to the rays of the sun, of the personality shining. And the child no longer living in the rays of night in the depths of the underworld. And I don't mean a full reversal, because sometimes it's the imprint of the astrology chart is who you are. So when you see a Pluto moon aspect, that represents who you are, your lesson in this life, or and if not even as lesson, just as an aspect of who you are in your journey. And so it's not as if full recovery means like being in the solar world all the time. It just means being in the solar world with the same ease at which one is in the lunar world. And what I've heard from psychologists is that recovery is never 100% for these kinds of traumas. In other words, one does the best they can to recover their soul and with their soul, re-inhabit the world outside towards health and recovery of the self. And some other aspects to consider is Moon conjunct Nessus, um, aspects between Pluto, Moon, and Mars, Moon and Algol, because Algol is symbolic of Mars and Jupiter, and Nessus is symbolic of Mars and Pluto. And then, of course, we're talking about Pluto aspects. And as a similar expression of these paths to healing, or these paths of reaction or result from this type of abuse, is you can become the abuser, you can attract abusers, or you can abuse oneself. And the way that healing looks like in any of these is to realize that there is no victim or victimizer anymore. The cycle is complete. And the only thing left to do is become a victor in the sense of re parenting the child that was never parented before. So the solution in these cases is to become the parent yourself for your own child. And a part of that is also to forgive the parent and not to necessarily lock them in that identity, but to do what you can to achieve your peace, even if that means separation, but ultimately to achieve your peace by taking care of the child that's still lost in that underworld from childhood or from however long ago that was. And that means to acknowledge it. That means to create that space within yourself to allow that child to be nurtured so that that child doesn't have to come out and to possess the body and to self-sabotage the life. I hope that was helpful. Um, again, as you can see by the image, it's about boundaries. Pluto moon, Pluto's about destruction of the self in order for the self to reassemble itself, find the soul, reassemble itself and reassemble its boundaries and heal the past by acknowledging it and taking care of the child. Hope that was helpful to you all. I didn't expect to go this route, but I think from my studies in it, I think it's in my own experiences in it, I think it is important to talk about the archetype of the Devouring Mother. In forthcoming videos, I'm going to get into Venus Pluto aspects and Pluto Mercury aspects. And I'll see you guys next time. Please feel free to like and subscribe.